Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a really close look at a country that's often described, I think aptly, as a mosaic.
Hmm.
A place shaped by just incredible layers of history, culture, and sometimes, really tough challenges.
We're talking about Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Exactly. And we've got, well, a whole stack of source material here, articles, research notes, basically our map for this deep dive.
That's right. And our mission really is to go beyond the headlines, isn't it? To unpack those layers you mentioned.
Yeah.
We want to understand how the actual ground, the geography of Bosnia and Herzegovina, its diverse peoples and its, well, often turbulent past have all kind of meshed together.
To shape its identity and the complex reality it faces today.
Right. And we'll try to pull out the most important insights, those key nuggets from the sources you've shared with us.
And as you start digging into these sources, that image, that mosaic, it really stands out, a crossroads.
Mm-hmm. A crossroads, yeah.
Yeah.
A place at the intersection of empires,
Mm-hmm.
marked by conflict, definitely, but also defined by, I think, the incredible resilience of its people. That comes through strongly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Where do we begin? Maybe the land itself, its earliest history?
Yeah, that's good. So the sources mention Bosnia, even way back in Roman times.
Right.
But they make it pretty clear that the borders we see today, or something close to them, are actually much, much more recent.
Really? Like when?
Well, they start to become more defined around the 15th century, connected with Venetian territories.
Okay.
And then a really significant shaping happens with the Austro-Hungarian period, late 19th century.
And it's interesting how the maps themselves tell a story, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Cartography is key here.
The sources show Austrian maps being used even after Yugoslavia formed, then a new Yugoslavian map in 1929 showing administrative changes.
Right, and then cartography expanding in the 50s.
Yeah.
And there's this fascinating detail about maps for Expo 67 in Montreal. Specifically for B&H, they actually made a bilingual map, Croatian and French.
Wow. Okay. Let's go back even further. Prehistory. Mesolithic. What do the sources say?
Well, information is pretty limited, obviously, but there are these intriguing glimpses.
Like what?
They mention contributions from ancient inhabitants, described kind of poetically as keepers of old stock. And they describe structures like short stone monuments, burial mounds, even stone idols that sound almost mythical, like giants from Homer or Virgil.
And their descriptions of wooden markers pointing up, maybe worship sites, sacred groves.
That's the suggestion, yeah. And tombs guarded by these cephalostone heads. The sources guess they might reflect beliefs in, like enraged gods or something.
We also see mentions of unique finds, symbolic carvings, specific tomb designs in the southeast. Suggests diverse early culture.
Exactly. It paints this picture of a really rich, maybe mysterious early spiritual world. Things like glittered stones on graves could be about the afterlife, or maybe trying to frighten the dead away.
And worship sites connected to nature. Stones, rocks, trees, maybe used in trance practices.
That's what the sources seem to imply.
Yeah.
Then we move into the Roman period and what came after.
Right.
The sources note that these post-imperial states used map-making, cartography to kind of cement their new identities.
Makes sense.
There's even mention of striking avant-garde maps during Ottoman times, including one called a monstrous map from 1799. Sounds dramatic.
Definitely. And people like M. Brzezinski, K. Wojnich, involved in this map making.
What's really revealing here, I think, is how even within these larger empires, you see spontaneous desires for sort of national identity bubbling up among the local Slavic populations.
Yeah.
Clergy, administrators, military. By the late 18th century, you have rival empires like Austria-Hungary getting really interested in territories like the Bosnian Sanjak. That starts shaping things.
And the early surveys, the detailed mapping, actually revealed a kind of natural unity. Shared rivers, ethnic patterns, language.
Yes, exactly. A common hydrographic, ethnocultural, spatial, and linguistic unity, as the sources put it.
This sense of unity, then, revealed by the land and people, sort of paves the way for new political ideas.
Seems like it. The old ways of thinking about owning rivers and lakes changed, and the Ottoman legacies started being viewed differently. Geography, ancient practices, mapping, all tied into identity from the start.
Which brings us neatly to the medieval period,
where we see a distinct Bosnian political entity really start to take shape.
Okay, medieval Bosnia. The sources say political organization kicks off mid-12th century under a ruler called a Ban.
Right. And the most famous early one is Ban Kulin, ruled 1180 to 1204.
He's highlighted as a skilled diplomat, crucial for getting Bosnia on the map. literally and figuratively.
Very much so. He affirmed medieval Bosnia as a political unit in Europe, and Bosnia's landscape helped its geomorphology, made it a natural stronghold for centuries.
And the state named after its own people, the Bosnians.
Exactly. Later, the Kotromanic family becomes central. Powerful nobles ruled from the early 12th to mid-15th century.
And one of them, Banis Stjepan Kotromanic, really expanded Bosnia's territory in the 14th century.
He did. The sources list areas like Zavrishkjer, plains to the south, river basins. He brought a lot under Bosnian control, adding inherited lands too.
But the peak, the real high point, was under Tivrko I Kotromanic.
Ah yes, Tivrko. Described as brilliant, ambitious. In 1377, he goes big, proclaims himself king not just of Bosnia, but Serbia, Pomorje, the western lands.
Wow, so that's when Bosnia becomes a kingdom, described as unconquerable.
At its height, yeah. During this era, building on Kuplin's legacy, the sources suggest Bosnia might have been the most developed South Slav state, even had Bosnian on its official seal.
And local nobles held significant power, even forming infantry, raiding neighbors. Internal tensions, too.
Yeah, a complex picture. Feudal lords, nominally, but nobles assembled Islamic infantry, conducted piracies, and princely treasons could cause trouble for the king.
Cities grew important, too,
Right.
especially those controlled by nobles. Trade hubs.
Definitely. Trading with Venice, Dubrovnik. And crucially, these towns had a lot of commercial autonomy, sometimes independent even of the ban, unlike some towns gifted to Hungary.
Banis Japan's later expansion brought in coastal areas, Dalmatia.
Western Hum, parts of Dalmatia, yeah. His capital was in Calvary, Council in Ruda, Trvunagic connecting to Split Dubrovnik route, inherited key coastal towns too. Authority even stretched into Slavonia.
Sources list prominent families, but Tivrko's attempts to elevate nobility weren't always smooth.
No. His decision to accept the kingship apparently ruffled some feathers among local nobles, led to internal revolt, suggesting Japan had limited control over some powerful figures. Conspirators apparently designated near Travnik. Dynamic times.
A powerful kingdom indeed, but facing a rising tide.
Exactly. The Ottomans. Which brings us to the next major transformation.
The Ottoman era, and the sources really stress how fast the conquest was, 1430 to 1463.
Remarkably quick, they list key towns falling: Tsarigrad, Srebrenik, Dobosh in 1430, Jachi, Maglaj 1436, Banja Luka 1437, and again in 1455, Ripach 1449, culminating with Sarajevo in 1463.
Which is when King Thomas fled, last stand at Banja Fortress.
That's what the sources say. Then came the administrative changes. Initially a simple sanjak, later a province, a vilayet, eventually merged jurisdiction with Herzegovina.
And the late Ottoman period, attempts at reform, influenced by internal needs and external pressures.
Yeah, the Ottomans were trying to modernize, move towards a more European model of civil society. The 1865 Vilayet Constitution for Bosnia is seen as part of that.
Population grew then, despite migrations, uprisings.
Apparently so. The 1865 reforms set up the Vilayet structure, a governor, and administrative council.
And that council was meant to be half Muslim, half Orthodox members,
Yes.
plus a general assembly.
Right, an attempt at representation, perhaps, but it was also a time of major unrest.
The 1875 revolt started with Serbian peasants protesting taxes, spread quickly.
Yes, and led to Ottoman defeats. Ironically, that state of war actually spurred more reform efforts, driven by European powers.
This ties into the whole question of the East, doesn't it? The Ottoman Empire's future.
And in terms like preventative occupation, linked to the 1878 Congress of Berlin, basically, a pretext for powers like Austro-Hungary to move in. It was a period of intense international maneuvering.
Culminating in the collapse of the Bosnian Vilayet in 1877.
Right, and culturally, religiously. Modern B&H emerges from this really complex history, a multi-religious, multi-ethnic crossroads.
The sources clearly identify the three constituent nations, Bosniaks, Croats, Serbs, and the main religions, Islam, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, all with major community institutions.
And it's fascinating. Under socialism, which officially pushed religion aside.
The opposite happened.
For Bosniaks, yes. Islam and the Islamic community became a core part of their ethnic identity, differentiating them.
And tragically, religion became central in the conflict, both victimization and reconstruction.
That's what the sources state. Communist regimes had already linked religion and ethnicity, and religious communities themselves participated in the war. Clergy involved, finances, acting as aggressors or victims depending on the context.
That deep intertwining of identity, religion, and conflict. It's a recurring theme. And after the Ottomans, another empire steps in.
Austria-Hungary. The 1878 Congress of Berlin gave them a 30-year mandate to administer Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Met with outrage by many Bosnians, the sources say.
Understandably. For Austria-Hungary, it was seen as, well, necessary. Part of a Balkan Empire idea, a way to exploit resources, expected to cure everything.
So they took over state power from the Sultan, who becomes an innocuous old woman in the source's colorful phrase.
Yes. And they invested heavily in infrastructure. Supply depots, warehouses, cities, roads, bridges, railways, factories, tangible signs of control and modernization.
But tensions remained. Resistance from those who felt they were unprepared rulers.
Definitely. And interestingly, that 30-year mandate, it was actually cut short. Rescinded after 13 months because a new plan was deemed a security risk.
So B&H falls into this kind of imperial shadow, brief hints of nationhood, then tight control.
That's the picture painted. Divided, lost sea access, economy weakened, national institutions suppressed. All about securing resources, gaining regional control.
Okay, the economy under Austria-Hungary, sources say there's a lack of data before 1878, making research hard.
Very difficult. And much existing work was state-controlled. Plus, tragically, a lot was destroyed or taken out of the country after the 1992-95 war, seen as occupiers removing national history.
Wow. Sources mention a paper looking at B&H's economy in the context of EU accession, comparing it to the Western Balkans.
Yeah, analyzing growth, obstacles, political and economic criteria. It points out that structural reforms across the region often led to initial GDP drops per capita, cites Slovenia, Kosovo as examples during conflict periods.
So the emphasis is strongly on structural reforms, boosting production, trade, finance, labor market, public sector changes.
Absolutely. Crucial for growth. Employment, investment, exports, productivity, all seen as vital for development and catching up to the EU.
And culturally, second half of the 19th century under Austro-Hungarian rule. Big Western European influence.
Huge influx in thinking, fashion, general spirit. An openness to new ideas, constant exposure. Very different from before.
It even affected traditional folk music, which had been more closed off.
Started to change it, yeah. The mix of cultures, new settlers with different tastes. It created space for appreciating outside values.
Leading to a boom in cultural activities, folk groups, choirs, orchestras, theater, new songs, dances.
A real flourishing. October 10th, 1878, the arrival of the Austro-Hungarian army is marked as the start of this daily presence of Western culture. Newspapers, magazines, theater, railways, telephones.
And a new educated class emerges, influenced by Western ideals.
Right, and they believe they could modernize the province. The sources describe this interesting dynamic, people wanting to use new opportunities for themselves, the elite seeing the people as a way to achieve progress.
This period also sees the rise of modern national movements across Europe, based on ethnicity.
Yes, spreading from the West, more intense in Eastern Europe under the big empires. Grassroots movements pushing for rights.
And the Balkan Wars, mid-19th century, encouraged by Russia. Ottoman Empire losing territory, new states forming.
Like Bulgaria, Serbia, Albania, Montenegro, Romania. But the Bosnian case, the sources stress, was qualitatively different.
How so?
Bosnia was seen by the great powers mainly as an object of competition, not somewhere they actively planned to create a new state, unlike some others. Russia focused on Slavic Orthodox states elsewhere.
So Bosnian leaders weren't pushing for a new state, but seeking protection for existing rights.
Largely, yes, seeking a protector. Under Austria-Hungary, financial autonomy vanished, new bureaucracy came in. The Muslim population became an object of care, not a partner.
But towards the turn of the century, national programs did start forming, outside the state, linked to civic ideas.
Yes. As welfare and education grew, political life moved outside official channels.
Yeah.
Organizations, parties focused on economic, educational, cultural advancement were founded.
But post-WWI, in Yugoslavia, Bosnian Muslims were in a tough spot, seen as less important than, say, Bosnian Croats.
That's the argument. Croats were more numerous, culturally dominant, held key state positions, sets the stage for the next era.
The Yugoslav eras. Okay, after WWI, the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes forms. B&H is part of it.
Right. A national assembly for B&H was created, meant to have power, but political unrest was there from the start. Challenges from all sides, the sources say.
Leading to the king stepping in 1929, abolishing parties, renaming the country Yugoslavia, dividing it into Banovinas.
Correct. B&H became part of a Banovina centered in Sarajevo, headed by a ban appointed by the king.
And this meant Bosnian Muslims lost their distinct state territorial community. Power centralized under the ban.
Effectively, yes. Old institutions gone, admin and police under the ban.
Then WWII, Yugoslavia attacked, disintegrates, B&H divided among Axis powers.
German and Italian military authorities initially, then unified under German civil administration in 1942 as the Bosnia district, but still fragmented, clashing interests, ethnic divisions.
And German plans for a subordinate state, possibly within a larger Croatian satellite state.
Yeah, and the sources mention false information and misleading maps being used, distorting the region's image during this chaotic time.
After WWII, Socialist Yugoslavia, B&H gets republic status back, 1946 Constitution.
Yes, reformed on a large scale, status preserved, emphasizing federalism. Back on the map as one of the 6 republics.
But defining the borders was still tricky. Federal government took it on in 1950. Working groups formed, but never fully resolved.
Apparently not. Remain an issue. A 1954 law and diagrams show the present-day municipal and Sarajevo borders. Historical documents show ongoing discussions, expert input, commission efforts. Mapping remained complex.
Economic and social changes. Borders didn't change much initially in the kingdom, but the Banovina shifted internal lines.
Right. Post-WWII, republic borders stayed mostly consistent, just minor tweaks.
But a key point the sources make is about the society itself. People, history, life patterns, creating a place where different origins clash and commingle.
Exactly. Layers of heritage from migration, invasion, refuge, sometimes conflicting, making cohabitation uneasy at times.
Sarajevo identified as the most intense space. Capital, largest city, huge ethnic religious class mix. Most are too, maybe less extensively.
Yeah, Sarajevo is this junction point, Slavic, Romanic, Germanic languages, Islamic, Orthodox, Catholic faiths. Its architecture is like a history book, Romanesque, Renaissance, Gothic, Classicist, Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, Yugoslav brutalism.
And most are noted for its Ottoman heritage, but the sources argue against seeing it as just one faith's town.
Right, suggesting its name points to a unified origin later fractured, called a herder of city contents, a place with deep history often missed or repressed. Understanding this diverse mix is crucial for the next very difficult period. Absolutely. The breakup of Yugoslavia, the war, and the tough post-war reality. The sources are stark, the breakup was bloody, and B&H was right at the center.
Tito's death in 1980 allowed suppressed ethnic tensions to surface. Power struggles. Milosevic pushing Greater Serbia.
Yes, seeking Serbian dominance as other republics eyed independence.
B&H, with its mix, initially seemed like it might avoid conflict, but war erupted in '92, after Slovenia and Croatia went independent.
Yeah. Violence by Serbian paramilitary forces against local Croats and Bosniaks, the sources state.
Leading to horrific atrocities. Srebrenica, July '95. Over 8,000 Bosniak men and boys killed by Bosnian Serb forces.
A specifically highlighted tragedy in the sources. The war finally ends late '95. Washington Agreement for the Federation, then the Dayton Agreement.
Dayton partitioned the territory. 2 entities. Recognized the state of B&H, but limited its sovereignty.
That's the framework it set up. Post-war, some reconstruction efforts under international pressure. But hopes for stability undermined by political maneuvering.
Sources argue the risk isn't just ethnic tension, but lack of democratic vision.
Right, saying the legacy of conflict and the bloody politics of ethnicity isn't easily overcome just by theory. The people's struggles are acknowledged, but the future looks challenging.
Looking at independence, contemporary discussions often framed in broad terms, nation building, etc., but key fields like social geography ignored.
That's the critique, leading to a simplified view of B&H as homogeneous, events vague. The info exists, often in spatial representations, but hard to access.
B&H, a prime example of this gap. Need for maps, spatial depictions to show the real continuities and discontinuities.
Exactly. Arguing a comparative approach shows the value of spatial perspectives and how external views shape understanding.
International recognition, early 90s. Global shifts affect B&H. Democratic movements turn violent in mixed areas.
Yes, B&H awakens, demands freedom, but the new multi-party system didn't form around a unified civic nation idea.
Instead, parties became advocates for nationalism, especially in mixed regions. Ethnically based parties dominated, deepened divisions.
That's how the sources describe it, promoting identical fears for all 3 groups, creating us versus them security concepts based on ethnicity.
Leading to competing political concepts, confederalism for Bosniaks, Greater Croatia via HDZ, Greater Serbia via SDS.
Those were the visions outlined. Resolving B&H's status became critical. Defeat of the communists in elections was a turning point, bringing nationalist parties to power.
Within Republika Srpska, some leaders favored peaceful separation. Serbian part of National Assembly tried to form a separate republic, gain traction.
Yes, accelerating secession, leading to severe military conflict. And the JNA, officially neutral, directly attacked citizens, supplied arms to Bosnian Serb forces. That's the source's account. They also look back at deeper historical causes. Ottoman goals to conquer Hungary, weaken Catholicism.
Right. Mohacs, 1526, allowing Ottoman expansion into Hungary, Croatia, Bosnia. Defeat at Vienna, 1683, weakened them in Central Europe.
New states emerge. Austria and France have ambitions. As the Ottoman Empire declined, local Bosnian elite looked to align with European powers.
But Austro-Hungary, when they occupied in 1878, didn't grasp the complexity, and it was actually Russia's setback that spurred to act decisively on the Berlin treaties.
An interesting paradox noted in the sources, they provide that timeline again. Ottoman rule, Austrian admin enters Yugoslavia 1918, part of Socialist Yugoslavia 1945, new Constitution 74, independence 91.
Reiterating B&H, part of various empires. Little cartographic research focused on this narrative until recently. Maps depended on author's perspective.
And circling back to the medieval figures who asserted Bosnian statehood. Kulin, Stepan Kotromanic, Tvrtko 8.
Aftermath of the 92-95 war. Huge political, economic changes. Education massively disrupted. Schools destroyed.
Catastrophic damage. Post-95 reconstruction efforts with international help, but unifying the education system. Huge challenge. It became divided along ethnic territorial lines.
Operating separately since then, despite ministry efforts. Human cost, material damage, education in ruins, makeshift schools.
Yeah, loss of staff, buildings, resources. Little saved. Traditional teaching often replaced by small home groups. Post-war brought equally fundamental changes, making navigating globalization, democracy hard even for the educated. Which leads us to post-war reconstruction. Education system paralyzed, divided, invisible, war-torn, B&H, the sources call it, education policy split, Federation Bosniak Croat, and Republika Srpska, Serb.
Be centralized on paper, but Dayton created a really complex structure. The state level has framework laws, but little enforcement power.
Exactly. Real power over teacher training, curriculum, textbooks lies with the entities. The sources suggest in a divided society, groups naturally want control over schools to shape identity.
But interestingly, most day-to-day power is even lower. Cantons in the Federation, the district and RS local communities are key.
Which results, the sources say, in a system producing citizens identifying with their specific ethno-national group, reflecting wartime divisions.
After Dayton, the international community tried to ensure equal access. Proposed reorganizing legislation.
Yeah, based on non-discrimination constitutional framework. The peace agreement itself provided the framework. Nationalist Party signed it July 95.
Transforming the state from unitary socialist to a federated confederal state of two ethnicized entities.
Right, opponents handed over to entity governments' parliaments. New Constitution, Annex 4, radically changed the legal order. Internationally supervised ethnic partitioning became reality.
But the framework was incomplete. Didn't lead to real power sharing. Post-war societies still divided.
That's the argument. The two-power states idea wasn't realized. B&H, under strict international oversight for years, entities controlled by wartime ethnic parties, power sharing, bypassed, legal structures, unsettled, parties fearful of each other.
International involvement was huge, especially from 93. Muslim countries providing military financial aid.
Saudi Arabia, Iran, Libya mentioned, arms, ammo, food, medicine, salaries. Islamic world concerned by the arms embargo hindering Bosniak defense. Massive displacement.
Islamic community called for solidarity. Over 1,500 foreign volunteers arrived.
Yes. External aid increased later. Billions reportedly allocated for military production. War on international agenda, safe areas proposed. War crimes investigations started.
But Bosnia is still isolated. Sanctions, embargo remained. Defense minister appealed for fighters and arms, not just aid.
Right. Volunteers arrived, but poorly organized. Bases established behind enemy lines. Differences among foreign fighters noted, but focus was coordinating defense.
Mid-war phase. Closer ties with Islamic states, intelligence services. Iran provided intensive military aid, contributed to recovering territory.
Sources state collaboration was close. Political, military, economic. Training in Tehran for commanders. Intelligence agents sent to help shape the political system. Significant external influence.
Which brings us to contemporary B&H. Political structure incredibly complex. Result of the war, power divided between entities.
Varying degrees of state power. Multi-layered government. Bosniaks, Serbs, Croats involved in power sharing based on ethnicity. Seen as inefficient.
Parties follow ethnic lines more than ideology. Civil society developing but struggles to bridge divides.
Yeah. State executive. Tripartite presidency, one each nationality. Appoints council of ministers. State legislature. Bicameral, House of People, House of Reps. Designed to prevent ethnic dominance.
Below that, entities have legislatures governments. Federation has 10 cantons with assemblies governments, all subject to courts.
Described as complicated governance. Issues with basic laws, budget ratifications sometimes hindered by ethnic politics.
State under international protection. Peace Implementation Council, High Representative with broad powers, not limited by law or courts.
That's the setup. Seen as consequence of demilitarization, Z3 agreement, high rep dominance. Analysts sought fixes, but external controls on finance audit seen as ineffective.
Ethnic divisions. B&H unique in Europe. Conflicts seen as culmination of identity-based animosities in a federation held by authoritarian rule.
Shows vulnerability to politically invoked ethnic hatred over historical grievances, land, language, culture, religion, mid-90s, most ethnically diverse area in FC Europe.
Sources describe community origins. Bosniaks, Islamicized Slavs, Serbs migrated, Croats, Catholic Slavs.
Post-Dayton, communities became more isolated, reinforcing outside ties. In Ethelbody, B&H is unified, but locally it's two entities, Republika Srpska and the Federation, plus Brčko. Yes. Ethnic rivalry reinforced post-Dayton. Homogenization, segregation, urban areas emptied of others, parallel structures, social networks, ethnic identity enforcing territorial power monopolies.
Economic development analysis. One view starts essentially in 1992, disregarding previous periods for understanding current structure.
Yeah, seeing it as work plus capital plus production across sectors. The second level looks at production purpose, public, private, giving a broader view of economic independence.
B&H as a new small country model, underdevelopment expected unless radical change.
That's the perspective offered. Current challenges tied to political decisions, shares issues with developing countries but has specifics, weak institutions, poor legislation, lack of transparency, ethnic quotas, limited rights are main impediments.
War damage immense, over $1 billion. Huge production capacity destroyed, yet public institutions formed well post-war. Monetary, financial, legal.
Relatively well-formed, yes. Banks privatized, foreign-controlled, monetary stability achieved via Eurolink. Signed agreement with EU, integration strategy developed. But economic situation remains very bad. No significant positive trends for years, despite EU support.
Few new industries emerged. Development minor versus war damage, deindustrialization, need new growth model, focus on manufacturing, reindustrialization.
That's the argument. Aligns with EU goals. Structural reforms needed everywhere. Production, trade, finance, labor, public sector, investment, exports crucial. Productivity boost essential for convergence. Adjusting quickly to market changes is key.
EU relations. Very complicated. Potential candidate 2002, negotiations started, membership request 2007.
But stagnation since then. Key issues like state property unresolved due to political gridlock. Transparency lacking on negotiation steps.
Conditions for candidate status not met. Integration paused around 2009. Optimism replaced by retrogression. Sentiment that maybe the EU isn't helping reform.
That's the picture the sources paint. Shifting to cultural heritage. A rich blend. Material. Diverse religious buildings, fortresses, townhouses, urban layouts, tombstones, Brocto.
Intangible. Folk music, dance, oral traditions, crafts, instruments, proverbs, folk medicine. Traditional folk music reflects multicultural heritage, Bosniaks, Serbs, Croats, minorities.
Spontaneous, transmitted orally, shaped by history, environment, religion, ethics, language, emotion. A way for communities to express, connect, become heritage.
Creative potential not confined by culture. Influences mixed with original styles. Diverse, dynamic tradition. Tradition as evolving foundation.
Yes, thoroughly social phenomena. Both spontaneous and conscious, part of broader Balkan heritage. Movement, visual reaction, important in performance, intangible heritage passed down.
Literature, arts developed too, various styles recorded, folk literature music resilient despite turbulent history.
Remarkably so, the sources suggest. Cafes existed pre-Austro-Hungary. New admin reconstructed them. Western customs influenced gatherings, musical societies formed. Professional folk ensembles became prominent in cafes post-1878. Harmonica ensemble in early form.
Song-like folklore popular late 19th. See Bosnians embracing Western concerts, theater.
Yeah. End of century, cafes hire pro ensembles. Casina and Sarajevo significant. They developed new ways of arranging, performing traditional music, a new chapter.
Traditional practices today still reflect that heritage. defined by specific musical elements. Rural versus urban differences noted.
Yes, differences in repertoire, style, context. Austro-Hungarian era opened traditional music to West European influences, led to arranging for cafe ensembles. Western styles appeared as drawing room music, adapted indigenous tunes.
Changes in town populations affected urban music, differentiating it from rural. Urban vocal styles developed. Ottoman rule blended ancient Bosnian tunes plus Oriental influences, shaping urban music over centuries.
That's the historical arc described. Which leads us to wrap up future prospects, lingering shadows.
Sources revisit conflicts revolving around identity, reinforcing segregation. Yugoslavia breakup a key example. Demographic, territorial consequences remain. Societies built on ethnic principles post-socialism.
B&H and former Yugoslavia is important case studies. Bosniaks played a significant role internationally in peace process, but sources say post-war, international community framed them as victim nation, sometimes overlooking prior discrimination.
This framing meant Bosniak mobilization diaspora cooperation sometimes viewed negatively. B&H still marked by ethnic territorial disputes. De facto divided, constitution unsettled. Recent disputes rooted in representation problems.
Yes, youth and migration. Historically significant. Negative balance long time, but not necessarily insurmountable obstacle. Regional differences sometimes coincided with success.
Internal migration significant too. Rural to urban shifts. Some areas grew, others declined recently.
And the 90s conflict caused new migration waves. Ethnic cleansing, framed historically to explain contemporary changes. Analyzing daily life via migration. Politically organized mass migrations had deep consequences.
Displacement, genocide tragic. Collective migration fueled mistrust, fear, animosity. School system separation a direct result.
A very stark picture. Environmental concerns. B&H geographically rich, especially water, despite ethnic diversity, but significant problems, hard to solve due to political ethnic divisions. Focus needed on environment, natural heritage protection, wealthier in resources than neighbors. Great natural beauty, but altered by millennia of human activity.
Complex picture. Beauty versus damage from development, pollution, illegal activity. Urbanization created artificial ecosystems. Some rehabilitation occurred, but need to observe valuable areas, encourage awareness, connects to identity.
Right. Finally, future prospects. B&H at a critical juncture. Can political forces move past indifference for common good, justice, reconciliation? Sources see a realistic chance. Liberal democracy, rule of law, shown some resilience.
Ideas of social justice, tolerance stronger than ethnic nationalism long-term. Cooperation possible. But current establishment hinders development, seeks power. Risk of anti-constitutional measures, provoking intervention.
Or intervention taking sides could deepen crisis. Patience, caution needed. Elections potentially decisive. Can elite adapt? Younger generation emerging.
Non-nationalist parties could gain ground. Force rethink. But youth lack unified party. International community pampered elite more than strengthened civil society. Key to democracy.
Risk of rigged elections warned. Unless reform forces seize opportunity, pre-war chance at freedom might evaporate again.
Political stability post-war. Foundations laid. Central gov defense security, but entities had own ministries. Central bank independent.
Complex data aid management issues highlighted transfers, differing systems, security agency loyalty, sometimes political, though some worked on crucial issues. Tensions led to crises.
Economic growth. War damage catastrophic. Huge GDP capacity destroyed, but public institutions formed well. Monetary, financial. Banks privatized. Foreign controlled.
Monetary stability via Eurolink achieved. Signed EU agreement, integration strategy. But economy very bad. Limited positive trends despite EU support.
Few new industries. Development insignificant versus damage. Deindustrialization. Need new growth model. Strengthen manufacturing. Reindustrialize. Aligns with EU goals.
Structural reforms crucial everywhere. Investment, exports key. Productivity boost needed for convergence. Adjusting quickly is essential.
Wow. Okay. That is just an incredible amount of history complexity packed into these sources.
It really is. And it does all circle back, doesn't it, to that initial image we discussed.
Right. Bosnia and Herzegovina as a mosaic.
Right.
The sources use that term very deliberately, reflecting the deep dissimilarity of the three main groups historically, philosophically, culturally. And this isn't just about people, they argue. It extends right into the urban environment. Cities reflect the culture, society, history.
Exactly. And disputes between the groups about identity often play out in the urban landscape, connected to buildings, monuments. Mostar, Sarajevo, Banja Luka mentioned as key contention points.
As each group rose historically, they integrated their monuments into the city structure.
That's the idea. Most are reflecting both Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian heritage. Croat national competition linked to that AH period. Even bridge construction part of the narrative.
And tragically, Mostar's historic landscape, including the famous Old Bridge, became a literal target in the 92-95 war.
Yeah, the sources highlight its destruction. Attacked with artillery, gunfire. Groups seeking to claim it as a trophy replace historical details with their own ethnic symbols.
A painfully bitter struggle, the sources call it, to control the past, make it fit the post-war reality, creating this parallelism between ethnic identity and identifying with your environment, the ground itself linked to identity.
It's a powerful, and quite poignant way the sources describe how identity, history, and physical space are just inseparable in B&H.
Well, this deep dive has really shown the immense depth, the resilience of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's a place where, history isn't just in books, is it? It's a living force, constantly shaping identity, daily life.
It is, and despite those profound challenges from conflict, division, the sources show a country where that complex interplay of cultures, histories, it continues, even as it grapples with building, a stable future.
So for you, our listener, what can you take away from this incredible story? Given Bosnia and Herzegovina's deep layers of history, its diverse identities, the huge challenges of reconciling past conflicts within such a complex political structure, what can you learn from its experience about how societies navigate difference, how they attempt to build a shared future, even when, well, the weight of the past feels like it's always there?